Hello everyone and welcome to Life Transformation UK, where I am committed to helping you achieve freedom through confidence. My name is Ben, and in this video today I want to talk to you about how you can create healthy self-esteem in your life. You've probably guessed by the length of the video, but I'm going to be going really in depth about what self-esteem is, what causes it, how you can overcome it, and also some of the very common pitfalls that you might fall into when you're trying to overcome your low self-esteem. Along the way, I'm going to be sharing aspects of my life as an example of what someone with low self-esteem might look like, and also how somebody might overcome low self-esteem in their life as well. But I want to make clear that even though there are parts of my story that are a little bit sad, a little bit uncomfortable, that I'm not here sharing it for sympathy points. This is just purely as the best example I know of because I lived through it, and I'm really hoping that it will be able to show you that it is something that can be overcome if you're willing to put the work in as well. So if you're committed to watching this video all the way to the end, I'm going to be sharing with you 7 simple steps for how you can overcome low self-esteem and build healthy self-esteem in your life. I'm also going to be sharing a couple of freebies that you can use to help you along the way to building more self-esteem and more confidence in your life. And if you do want a little bit of bonus content, then don't forget to check out the blog post, which will be linked in the description. That's going to have a lot of information on there that might not necessarily be in this video today. Okay, so my personal story of low self-esteem really bottoms out around 6 years ago when I first went to university, because I was in a new city with new people. My future was very, very uncertain. As we'll go through in this video, there were bits and pieces of my childhood which were not necessarily amazing for me, and I had just come out of a very, very serious relationship just suddenly kind of evaporating overnight for me. So this was the point where my self-esteem was absolutely at its lowest, and it was starting to go from an absolute lack of self-worth into points of self-loathing and self-hatred, and me starting to wonder if I was actually contributing to the world, if there was any point in me even being alive anymore. So this was kind of where my self-esteem had taken me at that point. I was finding it really, really difficult to make friends, because obviously when you don't feel like you have any value, it's difficult to form friendships, because a key part of forming a friendship with someone is believing that you have some value, something that you're bringing to the table. So that, and me going down this rabbit hole of low self-esteem and feeling like I was just falling deeper and deeper and deeper, was causing me a lot of problems. And just as another example, I found it really difficult to speak to girls as well. And I remember having this one particular conversation with this girl where it was going fairly okay. We were having a conversation, it was going all right, and then suddenly I just started talking about how terrible my life was at that time, and the more I spoke, the more I could see just her switching off in the eyes. And looking back on it, it's pretty funny for me now to see that happening. Obviously at the time it wasn't, and I've kind of found my own way to see that. Some people might not necessarily see their experiences as funny, but that's just the way that I look at it now. But I could see her kind of switching off the more I talked about how everything was going wrong in my life, and kind of from that point on I found it really, really difficult to talk to girls because of that particular experience. And everything was kind of coming together to be a perfect storm of low self-esteem. But as you may have guessed from just watching this video up until now, I have, of course, gone past that. I am in a place of much more healthy self-esteem, healthy enough that I feel comfortable sharing my story and what I did to overcome low self-esteem in my life, and how you can go about beating it as well. Alright, so first things first, let's talk about actually what self-esteem is, because there might be some misconceptions, and I think really getting clear on it at the beginning of this video is going to really help to inform the rest of it. So self-esteem is all about how you feel about yourself. If you feel like you are a person with worth, or if you feel like you're a person that doesn't have any worth. There's this idea of self-concept, which is the way that we think about ourselves, and self-esteem is all about how we feel about ourselves. And there's two types of self-esteem. Most people, if you ask them what are the two types of self-esteem, they'll say high self-esteem and low self-esteem. And only one of those answers is correct. Or at least only one of those answers is kind of what we're looking for. Because people believe that high self-esteem is the opposite of low self-esteem and we should all be aiming towards high self-esteem. The problem with that is that high self-esteem, so self-esteem on the highest end of the scale, can often lead to certain aspects of being way too narcissistic. And I know this because this is something that I went through as well, and I'll share it a little bit later on when I talk about the pitfalls of building up your self-esteem. So high self-esteem can lead to arrogance and narcissism, and it's not the path that you want to go out on, because you're just kind of swapping out one set of bad beliefs and bad behaviors for another set. So high self-esteem, that's not what we're talking about. What we want is healthy self-esteem rather than low self-esteem. So healthy self-esteem is all about holding a positive but realistic view of yourself as a person with worth, whereas low self-esteem is a negative, unrealistic view of yourself, and you view yourself as not having any worth, or as I am not good enough. That's kind of the statement that usually characterizes low self-esteem. So when you do have healthy self-esteem, you'll often find yourself living in the present. You're a lot more empathetic as a person. You're resistant to the anxiety of rejection. Rejection doesn't really bother you as much as it would do if you had low self-esteem, and you're perfectly happy living within your own values. Low self-esteem, though, is characterized by self-criticism and self-blame, and not being able to take rejection, not being able to take feedback, believing that everything is their fault, but at the same time that they don't deserve all the bad things, and sometimes that they do deserve all the bad things. And it is an entire mess of negative emotions which I would not wish on anyone, not even my worst enemy. One of the worst things about low self-esteem is that you cannot see your positive qualities anymore. And that's a very, very bad thing. When you can only see your weaknesses and the things that detract from your life, then you're going to find it very, very difficult to build confidence and to live a life of freedom, which is what Life Transformation UK is all about. So let's go into a little bit of depth about what exactly causes low self-esteem. So before we continue, it is important to also know that self-esteem is very, very predictive of our futures. Scientists and psychologists have used levels of self-esteem to predict things like academic performance, successful relationships, and even potentially criminal behavior. Now, it is important to say that just because scientists and psychologists have been able to predict that someone with low self-esteem might become a criminal slightly more likely than somebody with healthy self-esteem, it doesn't mean that that is what is going to happen for you if you continue living with low self-esteem. These are just tendencies. They are not kind of written prophecies about your future. But self-esteem can be very, very predictive of later life outcomes. And that's because low self-esteem can really restrict the choices that we think we have. And when our choices are restricted, we often find ourselves making poor decisions and poor life choices, and that kind of feeds this cycle of low self-esteem until you can find yourself in a place of anxiety and stress and depression, and all of it not being very good at all. And as I've already alluded to, self-esteem is very much the foundation of confidence. If you don't have self-esteem, then you're unlikely to be able to build up confidence in your life as well, because how can you act confidently if on the inside you don't like yourself? It's difficult to walk the walk and talk the talk when on the inside you feel like a terrible person. So let's get into what causes low self-esteem, or what can cause low self-esteem, so that we can move on into how we can overcome it and build more healthy self-esteem in our lives. Okay, so what exactly causes low self-esteem? Well, Self-esteem is something which is developed over the course of our lifetimes. It starts when we are very little children and it moves through into our kind of teenage and adolescence years, and that is when it really starts to form a little bit more concretely. And then we have experiences throughout later life, and those either reinforce our current levels of self-esteem or they change it in some way, either for the more positive or for the more negative. So some of the childhood experiences which might cause low self-esteem are things like highly critical parents or highly critical authority figures. A lot of ridicule, a lot of teasing, things like that can really potentially damage a child's self-esteem. Also, expectations of being perfect all the time. For me as a child, I always felt like I had to be perfect because I grew up in a very, very religious family where there were a lot of very, very strict rules about kind of the ways that we were to behave in public, and especially at church as well. And I had a lot of problems with some of the authority figures in many of the churches that we came to. I was often viewed as a troublemaker, whereas all I wanted to do was just ask questions, because I found that a lot of the stuff that was being taught was very much unfair. And again, some of the stuff that I learned at a very, very young age when I was in church was very much negative towards my self-esteem, because the entire premise of a lot of the very, very strict churches that we attended was that ultimately no one was worthy of the love of God. And when you're a child and you are being told constantly, kind of day in and day out, that you are not worthy of the love of God, the person who is supposed to, or the person or the thing that's meant to mean the most to you, that can really damage your self-esteem over time, as it did for me. So a combination of being in a highly religious bubble, learning things which were not necessarily great for my personal self-esteem, having, or at least feeling like I had to be perfect all the time, that I had to suppress my personality, that I couldn't say what I wanted to say because I was meant to be seen and not heard. All of it formed the foundation for what would later become cripplingly low levels of self-esteem in my life. Throughout my early life, up until the age of 15, I was homeschooled, so I did all of my education at home. Pretty much my entire social life consisted of my brothers and sisters, so 2 brothers, 2 sisters, my parents, and that was it. But around the age of 15, my parents realised that if we were to have any future, if me and my siblings were to have any future, we would have to be put into school. So that was when I was put into a secondary school for the first time in my life, and it was a massive shock to me. Because I'd been told for a very, very long time that I was very bright, I was very smart. Assessors had told me that I was an intelligent boy. I had this idea of myself in my mind of being this kind of academic star, that I knew what I was doing. I was going to be top of the class in every single class that I went into. And that was the mindset that I went into school with, thinking that it was going to be a great experience, that I was going to get along with everyone, I was going to be super popular. And then when I got to school, reality hit. And I learned several things very, very quickly. The first thing I discovered was that I actually was not that smart, and it was not necessarily that I was developmentally behind, it's just everyone else there had a lot more experience in a school setting than I did, whereas I learned to kind of teach myself a lot of stuff. I wasn't so used to having somebody physically teach me, or kind of teach an entire class and learn in that way. I also didn't have the experience with things like geography and a lot of these science subjects that everyone else had been doing since they were kind of 5 or 6, and I was only picking these things up now. In areas like math and English, I was fine, but in pretty much every other area, I was not great. I was not nearly as smart as I thought I was, and my grades very much reflected that in the first few months. I also discovered that I was going to find it very, very difficult to socialise with people, because I had no idea how to do that. I had no idea to speak to people, let alone speak to girls as well. And obviously that is a huge part of being a teenager in school. And I had no idea how to do it. It filled me with massive amounts of anxiety, and it really made me feel kind of terrible about myself and the way I was. And then, as you tend to do in school, I really learned exactly where I fit in the world. And what I learned about myself was that I was kind of put into this box of being poor and mixed race and the family of immigrants, and all of this kind of negative mentality was built in my mind over the course of the next year or two. And as I learned about exactly where I fit in society, or at least where I thought I fit in society, it made me more and more anxious, and it made me feel less and less like I held value as a person, and obviously my self-esteem really started dropping from there. So in our teenage years, things like bad academic performance, being socially outcast, being bullied, things like that really affect our future, because this is when we start to learn about ourselves and about who we are and how we fit into the world. And if we have an overwhelming amount or even a significant amount of negative experiences during that time, it starts to really settle in and build up our idea of ourselves, because everything that we experience during those years gets put into one of two boxes, and either it is that I'm a person of worth or I am a person who has no worth. And over time, experience fills up one of those boxes, and you'll carry that with you for a very, very long time, potentially the rest of your life, if you never learn about it, if you never learn how to overcome that. Now, another one of the main causes of low self-esteem is trauma and abuse, and that is something that I am vastly unqualified to talk about, so it's not something that I'm going to go into in this video today. If you for any reason believe that your low self-esteem might be caused by any kind of trauma or abuse that you've experienced in your life, then I would highly recommend that you go and seek out a psychological professional, a counsellor, a therapist, psychiatrist, someone like that to help you through it, because they are going to be a lot more useful to you than some guy on the internet telling you about self-esteem. And it's one of those topics that I am not going to touch, because I don't really want to misinform anyone in any way or make any assumptions. So if that's the case for you, I would highly encourage you to go and speak with a therapist or a counsellor or a psychiatrist, somebody that can help you. Okay, the other three potential triggers for what can cause low self-esteem in your life are shame, social media, and body image. And I'm just going to rattle through those a little bit more quickly because they're a little bit more easy to go through. So shame is something that we can experience at any time in life. It's that feeling of being small, or that feeling of wanting to be small and kind of slip into the cracks and disappear because of something you did or something you said, something you thought, something like that. Shame is one of those things that makes us look inside of ourselves, and instead of viewing an experience as I did something wrong, we start to view that entire experience as I am something wrong. And so over time, shame can be very, very negative towards our self-esteem. Social media is the next thing. So with the rise of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, we find ourselves looking at hundreds of thousands of people's lives over the course of a week or a month or a year. And it's easy to see kind of what they have versus what we have, and that social comparison between people that we consider to have more than us, or people that we considered maybe to be better than us, can be really, really damaging to self-esteem. Now, this isn't to say that social media is a bad thing. It generally isn't. It's probably one of the best things to happen to society in the last couple of decades in terms of societal and technological advances, so I'm not here to rag on social media, but when you can log on to Instagram and be instantly flooded with pictures of photoshopped models, both male and female, celebrities flaunting their wealth, or the dreaded kind of entrepreneurs who are always telling you that you need to be always grinding and always hustling and doing this and that, and sharing all of these motivational quotes which are actually very much damaging rather than helpful and not motivational at all. It can be very, very easy to have that attack your levels of self-esteem as well. And of course, social media is one of those things which we are only being exposed to more and more. At the moment, we spend about 2.5 hours a day on social media on average. So it's only going to go up and up and up. And then the last thing is body image, kind of linked to social media, as well as the fact that there are these societal expectations, perhaps cultural expectations of the way that we're supposed to look, or the way that we're supposed to dress. And when you do not meet those expectations, it can be very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that you're not good enough because you don't dress the way that you are told that you should dress according to society or culture, or that you don't have the ideal body type according to society and culture. And all of it can really make us feel bad about the way that we are, and it's just another way that our self-esteem gets attacked day in and day out. But the important thing to remember is that no matter what the cause of low self-esteem, it can be overcome. And that's what we're going to talk about as soon as we have gone through what some of the potential pitfalls of overcoming low self-esteem are. Because this isn't something that is really talked about as much by people discussing self-esteem, is the fact that you can so easily skip the mark of healthy self-esteem and move into the kind of more narcissistic personality traits. So that's what I want to cover off in order to really get clear on what things you need to avoid, what things can actually make the situation worse for you. Right, so there's just 5 things that I'm going to go through, and then we're going to jump into how you can overcome low self-esteem and build healthy self-esteem in your life. The first one is overcompensation. And I would describe overcompensation as low-grade narcissism described as positive thinking. It's when instead of thinking that you are stupid, which was the kind of low self-esteem belief, you overcompensate and think, well, I'm just the smartest person to have ever lived, and therefore everyone else's opinion is invalid because everyone else is stupid. And this is a path that I went down, and if I'm being 100% honest, it does not win you a lot of friends. So I highly advise steering well clear of overcompensation and all of these other pitfalls as well. So the next one is arrogance. So instead of feeling like we are small and inferior, instead we feel that we are superior to everyone and that they should look up to us because we're doing our best to improve ourselves and everyone else isn't. And it can lead to all kinds of negative beliefs, which, believe it or not, I see a lot in the self-improvement community. It's one of the big problems that I have with it, is the idea that if you're into self-improvement, then you are kind of inherently better than other people. It's not the case. The next one is perfectionism, and this is one that I see a lot of the time. It's the idea that if we try hard enough and make sure that we're not making too many mistakes, that we can prevent ourselves from falling into low self-esteem in that way. And it leads to over-planning and over-analysing, and eventually that leads to a complete lack of action, which itself can lead to low self-esteem. But more often than not, what tends to happen with perfectionism is that the moment you do make a mistake or you do overlook something, then whatever self-esteem you thought you had really crumbles very, very quickly, because nobody can be perfect for any length of time, really. And then there's people-pleasing, trying to gain your self-esteem through other people. Again, this is not something that works, because over time you realise that you are only ever as good as the last good thing that you did. A lot of people also find people pleasers very much annoying, and it's kind of a parasitic personality trait to have, because you're not really doing it to make other people happy, you're really doing it for yourself, and that's not the mindset to have. And lastly is attention seeking. This is something that I had a huge problem with because I felt kind of small and unworthy. Instead, what I did was I made myself as noticeable as possible, so dressing in kind of outlandish and crazy way, or saying whatever it is I had to say to get attention, kind of off-colour jokes, things like that. Things that I look back on now and kind of cringe, because it is cringeworthy. It's not something that I am proud of, is these pitfalls that I fell into when I was trying to overcome low self-esteem, and it's the reason that I'm sharing them with you today. So attention seeking is probably one of the most prevalent forms of low self-esteem there is, because it's kind of just doing whatever it takes to get people to notice you, and that's hardly ever going to work. So let's jump into how you can overcome low self-esteem and build more healthy self-esteem in your life. Now, if you want a kind of complete list of healthy self-esteem behaviors, that is in the blog post. I've talked about a few of them before, things like empathy and kind of being okay with rejection. And then there's other stuff like being willing to ask for help from others, or being able to say no to things when it's not something that kind of aligns with your values. Living within your values is another one of these big things. So if you want to see that list of traits and behaviors, make sure that you check out the blog post, which would be linked in the description. But self-esteem very much comes down to unconditional living. So with self-esteem, you really start to impose a lot of conditions on your self-worth. You say things to yourself like, I'll feel worthy when kind of XYZ happens, or I'll feel loved when this person says this, or I'll feel accomplished when I'm able to do this thing. And we put all these conditions on our self-worth and our self-love and our self-respect, and it can really damage our self-esteem over time. And all of these are beliefs that we learn throughout our childhood and throughout our teenage years and even into later adult life as well. We create and store all of these beliefs in our mind about who we are as a person and what our perceived self-worth is. But the good news is that if we have learned these initial beliefs, then we can unlearn them and learn new ones in their place, and that's what we need to do here. And we need to learn how to live more unconditionally. That means making sure that you are respecting yourself, making sure that you find worth and value in your own being, and most importantly, making sure that you are taking time to love yourself. Self-compassion is also going to be the key here, because there are going to be times when you're going to fall back into old habits or you're going to make mistakes, and self-compassion really teaches you how to forgive yourself when those things happen, because they are going to happen. They're going to happen a lot. And you have to be prepared to not fall into a loop or a spiral of negative thinking that leads you back into low self-esteem. This is something that you need to kind of teach yourself over time, to treat yourself as you would do your best friend and really hold a place of compassion for yourself when you do make mistakes. Ultimately, all change work comes from self-love, because if you love yourself, then you are inherently going to want what's best for yourself. So make sure that all of this is coming from a place of self-love, and change happens from there. Now, I, over time, discovered 7 steps, and at the time, these weren't necessarily things that I did kind of back to back. These are things that I discovered for myself over time, and that's what I want to share with you today. 7 steps for how you can overcome low self-esteem and build more healthy self-esteem in your life. Okay, so we finally made it to the 7 steps for how you can overcome low self-esteem. I want to thank you for sticking with the video so far. If you've enjoyed it, if you found the information useful so far, it would really be appreciated if you were to leave a like on the video, because it really helps with the channel growth and for the video reach as well, to get out there and reach more people and potentially help more. So if you have enjoyed the video, if you find it valuable, make sure that you do leave a like. But let's jump into what these 7 steps are for overcoming low self-esteem in your life. So, at the core of low self-esteem is this one belief that we are not good enough, and that is a very difficult belief to attack head on, because it's a core belief. If something is a core belief, it's at the center of a lot of your decisions, a lot of your values in life, and it's not the easiest thing to overcome. So instead, what we have to do is find smaller limiting beliefs to go for, because every core belief is propped up by dozens, maybe even hundreds of smaller limiting beliefs. And if you can take out those limiting beliefs, over time the core belief collapses, because all that evidence that was propping it up disappears. So what we're doing in these 7 steps is that we are eliminating as many limiting beliefs as possible until the core belief collapses, and in the meantime we are creating new healthy beliefs for ourselves to prop up a new core belief that you are good enough, or that you do have self-worth or self-esteem. So, step number 1 is to discover your obstacles. And to do this, you're going to write down all of the goals that you have for yourself in life. Take as much time as you need and write down every single goal that you have right now. And they can be crazy extreme goals, or they can be very, very small goals. I just want you to write all of them out. And then for each of those goals, I want you to ask yourself, what is stopping you from achieving them? And this can be a long process depending on how many goals you have, but for every single goal, write down what is stopping you from achieving it. Every single thing or every single thought or belief that is potentially stopping you from achieving that goal. And what you'll find is that those things that are stopping you fall into two categories. They're either genuine impossibilities or they are limiting beliefs. So a genuine impossibility, for example, for me might be, I want to become a jockey, so a professional jockey, but I can't because I am 6 feet tall and I weigh about 215 pounds, and you have to be kind of between 4'10" and 5'6" to be a jockey. So I'm way too tall. That is a genuine impossibility. I could never do it. On the other hand, another goal might be, I want to become a successful businessman. What's stopping me is that I feel that nobody would ever buy anything from me. That's a limiting belief, because it's not a genuine impossibility. Of course, there's somebody out there that would buy something from me, depending on what I have to sell and if it matches their needs and so on and so forth. So genuine impossibilities, limiting beliefs, make sure that you mark all of the obstacles as either one or the other. So step 2 is simply to make a complete list of all of those limiting beliefs, and there might be less than 10 or there might be dozens. It entirely depends on the person. Just write down all of the limiting beliefs that you were able to find and keep them on a list. So step 3 is that we have to rank our limiting beliefs, and we do this by asking this question. So we go through all of our beliefs with this one question in mind. Which belief, if I changed it for the better, would have the most positive impact on my life? And when you've gone through your list of limiting beliefs and you know which one it is, mark that as number 1, and then go through the entire list again, asking the same question, which belief, if I changed it for the better, would have the most positive impact on my life. And when you get to the next one that matches up with that, mark that as number 2, and just go through until you have every single limiting belief ranked from 1 to however many there are, 10, 20, 50, 100. And you'll be able to work from either the top down or the bottom up, depending on whether you start at least or most impactful. Now we get into the more action-oriented change work, which is to choose which belief you're going to start off with, and we are going to eliminate that and propose a new belief. So let's say, for example, your limiting belief is, I am stupid. Now we need to propose a new belief, a new, more positive and realistic belief, because that's what healthy self-esteem is. It's a positive, realistic belief about yourself. So in turn, our new beliefs that kind of underpin that core belief have to be positive and realistic as well. So a positive but unrealistic new belief would be, I'm the smartest person in any room, which may be true, but it's kind of a 1 in 7.3 billion chance at this stage. There's a lot of people in the world. So an example to counter the limiting belief might be, I am working hard on learning more and more every single day. Because in that way you are acknowledging, first of all, that you don't know everything, but that you are working towards becoming better. And that to me is a much more positive belief that you can be working with. Step 5 is to embrace the possibility of change. So you want to ask yourself, how would your life be different if this belief were true? And you want to really get a very, very clear picture of what it is. So what would it look like for you? What would it feel like? What would it sound like? As much detail as possible, because you want to make the possibility of change as real for you as possible. Write it down if you need to, but just have some way of reminding yourself what life is going to be like and how life is going to be better once that new belief is installed. And then step 6 is to go and test your new positive, realistic belief in a controlled and safe way. So with the example of always working towards becoming a little bit better because you know that you don't know everything, In order to reinforce that belief, it might be things like going out and making sure that you're reading 10 pages of a new book every single day, or at least 10 pages of a book until you finish it, or going out and reading a few articles, or sitting down and doing your schoolwork, college work, university work, going and enrolling on a course or something like that. And what you want to do is you want to keep some kind of evidence log for yourself. It might be something that you just kind of keep mentally, a mental track of where you are, or you might want to keep a journal where you're physically writing down every single day the evidence that you are collecting towards your new belief. And over time, you will have built up enough evidence that that belief just becomes true for you. And when that's the case, you can move on to step 7, which is to repeat this process with as many limiting beliefs as it takes until you have built up the healthy self-esteem in your life. And of course, committing to always improving, always becoming a little bit better day after day. And that's it. That is the entire process of how you can overcome low self-esteem and reach a place of healthy self-esteem in your life. This is a process that I have gone through, although admittedly not as formally, because at the time I didn't really have a formal structure. I would have loved to have had this formal structure back then. It would have made things a lot easier for me rather than having to go out and piece it all together over time. But these are the things that really helped me to build healthy self-esteem in my life. And today I am, of course, happier and more confident than I've ever been. I have overcome all of the areas that used to cause me the most problems with my self-esteem. And through those experiences, I committed myself to building this channel where I can help people to achieve their own freedom through confidence. So there is a way forward, and you, of course, can overcome your low self-esteem. You don't necessarily have to take the path that I've done in terms of building myself up to be able to share this and help people, but it's possible to follow your own journey, follow these steps, and you can overcome your low self-esteem as well. So I suppose the message is, if I can do it, you can do it as well, as long as you're willing to put in the work and be honest with yourself and go out there and do it. So those are the 7 steps and everything you'll need to know to overcome low self-esteem in your life. As I said, there's a little bit more information on the blog post, which is linked in the description below. I also have something called the Freedom Through Confidence bundle, which I give away for free on my website. It's got the 7 steps exercise on there, as well as some other coaching tools such as the Wheel of Life, some journal prompts you can use for yourself, and more free worksheets and content that I am adding on there as often as I can to help you to achieve freedom through confidence. I also, of course, offer coaching in confidence to people. If you'd like that, you can contact me on the Facebook page, which will be linked in the description as well, or you can go onto the coaching page of my website, also linked in the description, and find out more information on how you can get coached to confidence from there. But otherwise, I hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful and valuable. If you have done, make sure to leave a like or a comment as well, letting me know what it is that you are going to be doing to transform your life, letting me know what your story is, letting me know how you're going to be building freedom through confidence. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe for more content on a regular basis on the Life Transformation UK channel. But otherwise, thank you very much for making it all the way through this video, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos and hearing your story of success very soon.